today we're going to talk about the super exciting topic of using Copilot, Microsoft Copilot Studio, specifically for agentic capabilities. I do have actually a few slides. Let me see if I can actually go back and share my screen. Next slide. Here we go. All right, so nothing too fancy on the screen, but basically what I played around with it, and I heard a lot about, back in the days when AI first started, everybody was talking about generative AI. I'm like, what is generative AI? That sounds really exciting. But let me go and figure it out. And all it is AI generating stuff, which is what AI does. And then later on, like probably a year later, people started talking about agentic AI. And I'm like, as Nathan would say, oh, it sounds like the name of a book or like a horror movie or something like that, agentic AI. Where does that come from? What is it? And basically it's nothing else but something calling your agent and then giving it some information and then letting it autonomously go and do work on your behalf. And I always thought that it would require something very complicated, very complex in order to manage something like that. But actually, it's super easy. It's very straightforward, especially when you're using Copilot Studio, because that gives you the low-code option of actually doing that work. So what I'm going to be talking about today is the agentic capability of Copilot Studio, how you turn your agent into an agentic agent. And the second part is doing agent-to-agent communication. So basically, as Charles Lamana would say, you're going to have like a whole army, an arsenal of agents, a universe of agents all deployed into your environment. And then you're going to say, all right, well, you're specialized in something specific. You're specialized in something specific. I'm going to send you some information and you do what you're best at, and then give me a result back. And then there'll be an orchestration in the middle that will allow you to do most of that work. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Not this screen, this screen. Actually, no, hang on. There's something else. So I've got a confession to make. I have an addiction, and that addiction is doom scrolling on YouTube. I think it's genetic. I don't think it's nature, or I think it's nature. I don't think it's nurture, because my kids also have that addiction. So now they are addicted to just doom scrolling and all of that. But although it's an addiction, at the same time, they do tend to learn a lot of popular culture. So the other day, my kids were just playing around in our backyard. There's a bit of a hill, and then they were using like sticks as lightsabers, as kids do, and all of that. And one of them was a little bit higher, and he's like, "I've got the higher ground, Anakin. You're the chosen one," telling his younger brother. And I thought that's hilarious. Like, they started introducing this humor into their day-to-day stuff and so on. And then one day I was talking to my son, and he said, "Let me call my friend Johnny." I'm like, what do you mean? And actually what he was referring to is the porn stars. So let me pronounce it correctly, porn stars, thick accent. But like, if you look at that picture, there's probably a 90% chance that the bald guy, I don't know his name, the bald guy is saying, "Oh, let me call my friend Johnny. He knows a little bit more about whatever you're trying to sell me." So with that in mind, what I created is an agent that is called my friend Johnny. And as you can see, it's in here. This is my Johnny Bravo. If you guys have sort of grown up in that era, you know who Johnny Bravo is. But my friend Johnny is specialized in something, and that's creating context called Johnny. That's the only thing that he does, right? So I've created that agent, and I'm going to show you how I configure that agent so that I can call my friend Johnny, and I can actually make him an agent that can communicate with other agents. So if I log in a little bit in here, let me zoom in a little bit into that place. It's a very simple agent. It has one topic, and that topic is to go and create something in Dataverse. So I'm not going to spend too much time actually creating it. I do tend to put in some instructions in here. So probably I jumped a little bit too far into where I am, but the way I actually got in there, so if you guys are familiar with the Maker experience, you go to make.powerapps.com. On the left-hand side, you have your, where am I? On the left-hand side, you've got your agents. If you can't see agents in here, then you have to click on more, and then it will be one of those. Or if you can't find it in here, discover all, and it will be there. But I basically have my agents in there. So I clicked on agent, and I can create a new agent, or I can go and edit the ones that I've got. So those are the ones that I have already created in here. And I've just created them in the last half an hour or so, just playing around, getting ready for this session. So this is my friend Johnny. And Johnny has very simple instruction. And the instruction says, always call the topic, create contact. That's the only thing that it does. So whatever instruction is going to get, given that I've got this enabled at the top, which basically says, use generative AI to determine how best to respond to the user. So basically, as I send it a message, it goes and tries to interpret what needs to be done. It tries to understand what the instructions are saying in here. And then once it has those instructions, going to call the topic. Topic is very simple, as I said. Create a contact. All it is that it has like a trigger that says, when someone says something like create a contact, go and create a contact that is has the last name Johnny. That's as simple as that. Nothing else, right? So you define your environment, you define the table you want to create, and then you say create a last name Johnny. So if we want to test that as a standalone a bit, so let's do that. Right. So I'm going to say create a contact. As simple as that. I'm going to enable this so that we can see a little bit of traceability in terms of where it's going. And I'm going to call it. And it's going to generate a plan, do a little bit of processing, realize that it needs to call the topic, create a contact, calls it, and then tells me everything is okay. So it executed exactly what I needed. So now if I go back into my app, this is a very simple app. It has things like meetings, follow-up meetings, expertise, and contacts, and accounts at the top. So if I go to contacts, hopefully I'm going to have a Johnny in there. I've got a couple of Johnnies in there. So that's all good. This is showing that it's actually working. So I'm going to delete those just so that we can actually have a clean start. I'm also going to delete the last one, the Power Platform user group, just to make sure that actually you realize that those have been called correctly. So far, so good. So let's go back to our topic. Now, there's one thing that you also have to do is you have to go into the settings. Let's leave this. And you have to make sure that that toggle at the beginning, that it can use sort of dynamic responses to answer, but also you have to make sure that this feature in here is enabled, right? And this is basically saying that I let other agents call me, right? And that's very important. If you don't have that enabled, it's not going to work. Once you enable that, always make sure to remember that you have to publish your changes, because basically when you do agent to agent calling, it's just going to check which agent has been published and it's going to do that. Because quite often I would make a change, I would like do a toggle or something, and I'm like, but it's still not showing on the other side. Why is that not showing? And it's because I haven't published. So always remember to publish. So now we've got our friend Johnny, who's capable of creating contacts called Johnny. Very simple, very straightforward. Now, if you want to start building another agent that hopefully we're going to create as an agentic agent, and then we're going to get that agent to call another agent, let's start by doing that. So I'm going to create a new agent in here. Now you can describe what you want to do using AI, but then it's going to do things under the hood, and it's going to take away the sort of understanding in terms of what are we actually doing. So instead of doing that, I like to start from scratch. So create a blank agent, and then I'll walk you through exactly step by step what I'm doing so that you guys understand how it all fits together. Right? So this one, we want to make sure that it's going to be triggered on a specific event. So what I'm going to do is wait for it to actually be created. So I want to give it a name. I want to make sure that we understand what it is. So as you can see in here, it says this feature isn't available until your agent has finished setting up. So it's creating some things in the background that will allow us to put it all together and then get it ready. All right, so it's ready now. So I can call it Agentic AI 2. And I'm going to click on save. Now, how are we going to make it agentic? How are we going to make it so that when an event happens, then that agent is called. And this is very simple. If you scroll down into all the different capabilities that you've got the triggers in here. If I add a trigger, and it's going to give me a collection of different options in terms of when do you want it to trigger, and I'm going to say Dataverse, when Dataverse, a record is created or an event is triggered in Dataverse. Now, what's really interesting is to see when else can you do that. So it can be recurrent, like on a schedule. It can be connected to your Outlook when an email arrives, for example. It can be connected to SharePoint. I know a lot of people use SharePoint, or even Teams and some other capabilities in here. So that's pretty cool in terms of how we can trigger it. So let's go into Dataverse. And in here, you're going to start noticing that it looks very familiar to sort of the way we've done things in the past. So it's looking at the options, so it's generating everything that it needs. So connection to Copilot Studio, connection to Dataverse, fantastic. I've got everything that I need. And then in here, you're going to say when I'm, let's say, modifying. And then you're going to say when I'm modifying an account. And then you're going to say the scope is going to be organization. So for you guys that have used Power Automate before, you're going to realize that looks very familiar, very similar to what we do usually in Power Automate to trigger something based on the way we're triggering. So use content from body. So this is an important part actually. Actually, I'll talk about that in a second. So when I click on Create Trigger, what it's actually doing behind the scenes is actually creating a Power Automate. And that Power Automate is going to trigger when an account is modified at the scope of the organization, so always, and it's going to pass to our agent this generated word that I've got in there. So let's wait for it to actually generate that. Here you go. And it's ready to be tested. So once I can generate an event in my Dataverse environment, then I can start connecting to it. But actually, as you can see in here, you can go and edit it in Power Automate. So when I click on that, it takes me to the Power Automate Maker experience, so make.powerautomate.com. I usually tend to use the previews just in case there are new features in there. But as simple as that, it's actually the events that we're used to in Power Automate. So when an account is modified, and then it collects information and then generates a text. Use content from body. Body is everything that is coming from that specific record. But then you can also be a little bit more specific. So you can say, give it the account name or give it the account ID. And in fact, you can pass it multiple parameters. What it's doing in here is passing a message to our agent. But actually, you can send conversation ID, you can send environment ID, but also you can create other parameters that turns it more into, let's say, an API. So you can have, for example, account ID, and then you can pass the account ID in that specific variable. So now when you're calling Copilot, you've got context because you know what parameters have been passed into that agent. And then you can use those in your logic to say, well, now that I've got an account ID, I can get the rest of the information that I need, and I can go and deploy and do something about it. Right, so this is the Power Automate side of things. And then once we've got that information, then it's a matter of creating the topics and then making sure we've got all the instructions in place so it knows exactly what to generate in that specific example. So rather than continuing with this one, I'm going to swap back to one that I've created previously, which is the Agentic agent. And I'm going to show you a couple of things in here. Close those. All right. So the first thing is that I've got the trigger. Now this trigger is when the account is created. So when I'm creating an account, I want this to be called. The other thing that I've done is that I clicked on Add Agent. Right? When you click on Add Agent, this is where you can introduce the agent-to-agent communication. And it gives you the option to go Azure Foundry, Fabric, Copilot Studio, M365 as well. So there's quite a few options that you can do in here, or you can create your own agent. In my example, I wanted to use one that I've already created. And given that my friend Johnny is already there, then I've selected that and added it in there. I can do some others that I've also published, like, KB Agent, the meeting sentiment agent, the create education follow agent. There are a few options in there. Again, all of those are agents that I've created previously. I've given them a name, I've given them an icon, some functionality, and I made sure that the agent-to-agent capability is enabled in them, that settings that I talked about earlier, and I've published them, and that makes them available in here. But I've got my friend Johnny in here that I can call as well. All right, scrolling up. No instructions in here, so relatively straightforward. When this agent has one topic, so I'm going to go into my topics in here, and I'm going to say, look at that specific topic in here. So what it's going to do is, first of all, the sort of description of that topic is to create a contact for an account. And what it's going to do in here is similar to what Johnny is doing, but it's actually going to create a contact called WPPUG, so the Wellington Power Platform User Group. Very similar to what we did on the Johnny side, but also we've introduced an additional step in here so that it does the Wellington Power Platform User Group contact. So hopefully, when I call this agent, and I'm going to test it first manually, so I'm going to put some information in here to say how it's going to behave. It's going to co-create the Wellington Power Platform User Group contact, and then it's going to create my friend Johnny's contact, so a contact called Johnny. So again, let's enable the tracing, check between topic, refresh that, and I'm going to say create a contact. And let's double check that there are no contact in here. So no one called Johnny and no one called Wellington Power Platform User Group. So let's trigger that and let's see if it's gonna work. Hopefully the demo gods are on our side. All right, so it detected that it's going to call that specific topic. It called the topic, it's waiting for the progress, and it's hopefully handed over to the next topic, and it generated the Johnny one. So let's have a look, refresh. All right, so we've got Johnny in here, and we've got the Wellington Power Platform User Group. So it did follow the instructions. It first executed its own duties, part of the agent itself, and then it handed over to my friend Johnny agent, and it created another agent and another contact in there. So I'm going to delete those. Right? So now the moment of truth. Actually, before we go do that, let's have a look at the trigger. The trigger itself is a Power Automate, as we mentioned. So let's go and investigate that. There's a question in here that says, if a large number of records is created, how to ensure the trigger performance. So remember, this is Power Automate. Power Automate is scalable. Power Automate is also asynchronous. So by the time you actually get the trigger that is handed over to Power Automate, the record is already created. So this is a post event, and it's asynchronous. Asynchronous means that it actually has a pool of servers that are actually responsible for triggering those Power Automates. So as a new event triggers, then it adds it into the queue of Power Automates to execute, and it starts executing them one by one as the resources are available. Sometimes it can execute multiple in parallel, but it has a threshold. It will not go beyond that threshold, which means that it will take its time. So if you create, let's say, 1 million records, then they will asynchronously trigger one after the other, and then you'll be able to see that they're taking their time. I had that issue when I was doing a data migration, although it was related to Power Automate, but not to an agent. But I finished my data migration and I migrated about 100,000 records. But then what I realized is that even though my data migration took about 15 minutes, the Power Automates took about 3 hours to complete. They just asynchronously trigger whenever the resources are available for them to pick up. Cool. So the trigger in here is when an account is added, and then all it's doing is just calling that specific agent. Now, the one thing that I do want to highlight is that you can actually monitor it. So this is when the event is going to trigger, then you're going to see in here that, like, for example, the last time I did that was 27 minutes ago. that it triggered, and then I know that it actually called my my agent at that stage. So this is on the creation of an account. Let's click on account. And then we were at sample 5. So I'm going to create sample 6. Save and close. All right. And now in here, if I refresh, if I refresh, eventually, so that answered the question, how to ensure trigger performance. You don't. And that's because it's Power Automate. It's asynchronous, right? So it triggers whenever it has the right resources to trigger. So now it triggered, and hopefully it's successful. So 7 seconds ago, it actually triggered, and it actually passed the information to my agent, which means that if I go back to my contacts now, I'll be able to see the Wellington Power Platform user group and the Johnny. So recapping what happened so far. An event triggered in Dataverse, which is on the creation of an account. That event then called my agentic agent, which was listening to that add event for an account. It went and did its duties, which is create the contact called Wellington Power Platform user group. And then it handed over to another agent that had another duty, and that agent created the Johnny contact. So it called my friend Johnny, which is the other agent that we configured, and it passed some information and it created another contact called Johnny. Now, very simplistic scenario is what I'm showing you today, and you can imagine, how it's going to scale up to something significantly larger. So I've got a few examples. I'm doing a session actually at the Power Platform Community Conference in Vegas, where I'm going to be talking about exactly that. The only difference is that today I have an hour. Over there, I'm going to have 5 minutes to do all of that. So I don't know how I'm going to do that, but it's going to be probably a recorded video that I'll just talk over just to tell them what's happening actually behind the scenes. But the context that I'm going to be using in the conference is that it's going to take a meeting, and part of that meeting, it's going to capture essential information. So someone types in notes for a meeting, or it's a meeting recording that is actually stored within a specific note section. Now I do have prompt columns that are responsible to extracting information that I'm interested in, part of the meeting minutes. So this is for social workers that go and support families, and they have to report on 2 different metrics. The first one is how's the family doing, and the kids specifically from an educational perspective, but also how's the family doing from a well-being perspective. Now, what I heard from my customers is that the actual people that actually, the social workers that go and capture this data, they don't differentiate between education and well-being. They just have a conversation with them, or sometimes they just type their notes, and then they don't necessarily think that this is a metric that they have to extract from the content that they're doing. So that's why I've introduced those prompt columns, adding AI, where it actually generates that text, and then it generates the education, extracts the education information out of it, extracts the sentiment associated with that education, and extracts the well-being and the sentiment associated with that. So whether they're doing well from an education perspective and whether they're doing well from a well-being perspective. Once this is triggered, then I've got another agent that is responsible for capturing that data and deciding whether there is some intervention that is required. So go and get in touch with an education specialist, and then go and ensure that they're actually engaging with that family to go and support them if the trend is going downhill. So that's something else that I also want to talk about. So there's another question in here before I move on: how to deal with infinite loops and agent dependencies. And agent dependencies. I'm just trying to think. This is possible. This is possible. So what's going to happen is that it's going to trigger your Power Automate at a very high rate, and there's a protection on the Power Automate side that will go. It looks like you're going into an infinite loop. You'll be able to see it from a monitoring perspective, and then sometimes if the rates are too high, then your Power Automate will start failing. When it fails, then there's a protection to automatically switch it off. So that will stop that infinite loop. but it's not going to detect it up front. And that's one thing that is quite interesting about the low-code platforms, is that they're not as connected as when we have Procode. In Procode, if you have static analysis, it might go, I think you're going to end up with an infinite loop in here. Are you sure you want to do that? You do that, then it starts triggering insanely. It hogs probably one of your threads in the CPUs, and then you'll be able to see it, and then you'll have to kill it. But most of the time, it will be able to detect that you might be ending up in an infinite loop. In this specific example, because they're different components talking to each other asynchronously, then it's only through the massive executions that you're going to detect that. So it is possible. It's not foolproof. And the only way that it would stop it is the moment it starts failing significantly, then it will automatically switch off and then tell you there's something wrong in here. Then you'll have to go in and investigate. Cool. So going back, so I was talking a little bit about what I'm doing in here and the context in which I'm going to presentation. So given that we've got more time in this session, we talked about Agentic AI and how to do it. Very simple. As you can see, we did it in like 10 minutes. We talked about agent-to-agent communication, also very simple. And it's just a matter of creating it, making sure you've got that flag enabled, you publish it, and then you can pass in that information across the different topics. Yeah, so I did talk about how to hand over to a different agent, just in case I missed that. So in my topics in here, I've got the create contact, and then it actually creates that contact and it just calls the agent. So in order to do that, you go to add an agent, and then you just select the agent that you want in here, given that it's part of my agents that I've used in the past, and that's or that I've configured up front, that it appears in here, and then you'll be able to just give it that call that you need. So that's relatively straightforward. Cool. So again, given that we've got a little bit of time, what I'm going to do next is show you how I can create an agent with no topic that knows how to do. Sorry, Nathan, you've got your hand up?
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering why you used a topic to create the contact instead of one of the tools.
The tools in here. That's what I'm going to show you next.
Oh, okay,
So,
sorry.
so the reason why I use the topic, and actually that's a good question, and the people at Microsoft were asking me the same question, is because I wanted to be deterministic,
Yep,
right? So I wanted to do exactly what I'm
yep,
telling it to do. I don't want it to interpret
yep,
what it's going to do. But that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to use a tool,
yep.
specifically the Dataverse MCP, and I'm going to give it instructions about what to do and cross my fingers that it would actually do the right thing. But let's have a look at that.
Cool.
Cool. So a little bit of context. So I've got those meetings that are created in here. There's a few of them. I've got two of them that are associated to a family called Munlas. So we've got September 26, for example. As you can see, it's associated with a family called Munlas. It has some sort of sentiment associated with it. And I've got the other one from August meeting, also associated with Munlas, and then it has some information in there. All right, so let me create a new agent, and this is going to be our MCP agent. Now, MCP, Model Context Protocol, is basically the APIs of agents, right? So it's the Swagger of agents, if you want. So it would understand that, hey, there is a server out there that has this list of methods that I can call, and some of them give me metadata so that I can actually know how to call the rest of my information, and then and then be able to actually address the information accurately as it is. So we're going to add the MCP server in here. Okay, so let's have a look. Triggers, agents, tools. Here we go. Add tool. So you can add the tool as Dataverse. And this is the typical connectors where you can tell it deterministically what to do. Or if you want, you can actually have a look at the Model Context Protocol, MCP, and then you've got the MCP server. Now, what's really interesting in here is that there's two of them. Now, I don't know if that has to do with the fact that I'm using the preview instance or not, but yeah, there's the preview in here. That has additional information that probably will be announced next month. So keep an eye on that. All right, so MCP server. When I click on it, it's asked me how do I want to connect to Dataverse, and I've got my connection in here that is already in place, so I'm happy with that. So add and configure, and then it's going to show me all the methods that are available that will help the agent understand what is required, right? So, and that is going to go through tools. So hopefully some of you have used MCP in like GitHub Copilot or in some other capabilities. But here you go. Those are all the tools that this MCP server is going to give you, like list the name of the tables, do a read query, create, update records, and so on. So there's quite a few capabilities that are available in there. So awesome. Yep, I love that. This is exactly what I want. Now go back to the overview. I'm going to rename that to my MCP agent 2. Let's go to 2. Right. And this time, I'm not going to create a topic. So to your point, Nathan, all I'm going to do is just give it instructions. Like, this is what I want you to do when you get a specific query. All right, so I've got hopefully something in here. Right, so here are my instructions. So use the MCP tools to answer questions. Now I am being a little bit prescriptive, just so that I know that it's actually doing the right thing. But you probably don't have to be that prescriptive, and it will figure it out by itself. But just for the purpose of that demo, and hopefully for the success of that demo, I'm giving it more information. So when asked about meetings associated with a family, get the family, which is an account, and then get the GUID. And then what you'll have to do is retrieve all meetings associated with that family. And this is, I'm giving it the schema name. And then I say the family is actually an account, and it's AI family. And that's the name of the attribute or the lookup. So basically, it knows that it needs to get the GUID, and it needs to pass it on to the family of all the different meetings. Now, when you get the information back, I'm asking it to actually get the education sentiment and add an emoji next to it if it's positive, neutral, or negative. And if the last meeting is negative, then I'm going to ask it to actually go and transfer to another topic, for example, and or ask the user if they want to engage an education expert or something like that. Right? So instructions, it's not deterministic. It's just me using natural language, explaining to the agent step by step what I'm expecting from it. Right? So that's the instructions. So now I've got MCP up and running. Now the first time I'm going to trigger it to ask my permission on whether it's allowed to actually use that connector, and then it's going to hopefully follow my instructions and be able to go and get the information that I need out of that. Right, so let's refresh our test agent in here. And I say, actually I might have it in my list meetings associated with the Munlaz family. I'm going to enable the tracing so that you can actually see its reasoning and how it's actually getting to the information that we need. Now, it doesn't usually work the first time, so bear with me. We may have to try it a couple of times. Right, so here you go. It's asking me permission to use the Dataverse MCP server, so I'm going to say allow. And then now it's actually understanding what are the tools available, part of that MCP server. Is going to list the tables to understand what are the tables and the descriptions associated with that. Is going to trigger a read query. And as you can see, the read query was actually retrieving information from the account, and it's passing in the GUID of that account. And then given that it knows now the GUID of the account, it's passing it into another query, and that query is for the meetings specifically. So the meetings get me the education sentiment, and again, this is the GUID of that account. So it followed my instructions pretty nicely, and it retrieved the two meetings that I showed you before, so the August meeting and the September meeting, and both of them had negative reviews. And it says, the last meeting has a negative sentiment. Would you like to engage with the best education expert? Yes or no? And if I say yes, then it's going to follow the rest of the instructions to go and trigger another topic and do the rest of it. There's a question in here. I'm doing my best to keep on top of those questions, but how do we prevent the drop SQL? That's a very good question. This is why the um, the first iteration of the MCP server was only to create, update, and delete contacts. It didn't have the schema capabilities. And when I was talking to Microsoft and saying, hey, I would really love it to have the schema capabilities so that I can actually go and build things agentically. And they said, yeah, but what about drop equal or drop table or like doing something that is really harmful to your environment? To which I said, yeah, that's fine, because this is going to be driven by the security roles that are associated with the MCP connector, right? So as you're building things, you're going to impersonate a specific user in the system. As you saw, when I added the MCP server, it said, who do you want to connect to? And I'm connecting as Rami. Now I'm system administrator. I have access to everything. And as I'm building it, I'm being very careful about how I'm using it on a step-by-step basis. But as you hand over to then another bunch of users that will be using it, then you would need to ensure that those users don't have, privileges that might harm the system. As an example, you don't want them to delete records, you don't want them to drop tables altogether. So that will be driven by security roles. That's the one part. The second part is if they do have those privileges and you actually want them to once in a while maybe drop a request, then you need to make sure that all your instructions are crystal clear in terms of what can be done and what cannot be done. So you have to, in your overview, for example, when you're talking about that, you say, never drop a table or never cause anything to fail. And those will be your sort of protection elements if you want. The other thing is repeated testing, just to make sure that you always get the intent that you need. I'm actually quite surprised that it worked the first time. Right now, I'm actually pleased that it's worked without trying it multiple times. But a lot of the work that Microsoft is doing is to ensure that they are becoming more and more deterministic, so that every time you're actually calling it, you're getting the response that you need based on the natural language. And a lot of it has to do with sort of an internal feedback loop, and just making sure that it sticks to the instructions, that if the instructions are pretty clear in terms of what you can and cannot do, then it just makes sure that it's happening that way. So very good questions actually that are coming in. So keep them coming. So now what we've demonstrated, just to recap a little bit about this specific demo, is that I created an agent. I did not create a topic associated with it. And then I added a specific set of instructions that would call the MCP server and then go and do some capabilities for me. And as you can see, it actually followed those steps. It did exactly what I expected it to do. And then it potentially had the option to go and connect to another agent that we did in the very first demo in there, all to potentially call another topic in that specific area. Cool. So Monica has a question to use GPT-5.
No, okay, a suggestion.
So, yeah. So yes, as you go into the higher, more expensive, if you want, the AI large language models, then they're going to start behaving a little bit better, and they'll understand your instructions better, and then less hallucination. One thing I did want to mention, and it occurred to me, like when I was trying to do a multi-agent demo, and for the demo to work, both agents have to work, right? So sometimes my primary agent would fail or hallucinate, and sometimes my secondary agent would fail and hallucinate. So if you think about two components that are dependent on each other, so typically when you're doing architecture of a system, they ask you about the uptime of an environment. And your uptime is basically the uptime of every single component multiplied together. So if I have one component, let's say dynamics, that is up 99.99% of the time, and I've got another component that is calling it that is up 99.99% of the time, the uptime of the entire system is 99.99 times 99.99 would give you 99.98, for example, right? That same calculation applies to agents. If the one agent responds 50% of the time accurately, and the other agent responds 50% of the time accurately, your chances are of getting an accurate answer is 25% because of 50% of the 50%. There's something to consider is that how accurate, as you go more and more agentic and then have some of your agents that are not 100% accurate, what is the possibility of getting a fully accurate answer end to end? Cool. So that covers that demo. We still have a little bit of time, and this is probably a proof that building those things are super easy and they're just working, right? So it's actually embarrassing how quickly we can do those things nowadays, and that's why every time we go to an RFP or our customers are like, "Are you guys serious? Like, why are you guys saying that you can do it in 2 months when we're expecting a year?" And then we go, AI. And that's proof that actually AI is accelerating things. Nathan, you've got a question?
Do you want to take those agent instructions, pop it into GitHub Copilot, and ask it to make sure that they're clear, add anything else that it thinks it needs to be added, and ask it to optimize token usage and see what it does?
Yeah, that's actually a good idea. But let's do that a little bit later because I still have one more
Oh,
demo
sorry.
up my
Okay.
sleeve that I wanted to
Yep.
show. The next thing that I wanted to show, and let me think if we actually create another agent for it or we just use that. I might actually just use that. So this is using the knowledge capabilities that are available there, right? So sometimes you do have some knowledge that is available in your system that you want to retrieve it, and you want to go and interrogate that knowledge. Now, typically that would be knowledge-based articles that may be in SharePoint or in any other format. But then you can also use Dataverse as your knowledge base. So I'm going to select Dataverse. And what it's going to do is show me all the tables that are available in Dataverse, including the MCP connectors, right? But for the knowledge, I want it to be very specific. I wanted to go and interrogate a specific table where I want to retrieve the information from. Otherwise, with MCP, it might be a little bit too broad. It might be a little bit too ad hoc to figure out what it is. So I've got a table called expertise, and that table will say information about some experts in the domains that I'm interested in. Like as I talked about well-being, I talked about education, and then it will have a bit of a review associated with those experts. So let's actually see if I'm going to give it some instructions. Hopefully we can do it without a topic, but we'll give it a go. We'll see how that goes. So let's edit that. I'm going to remove those topics. I'm going to say use the knowledge to figure out who is the best education expert. All right. Now, as this is happening, I'm going to go back to my model-driven app. I'm going to click on expertise. And in here, I've got Garth. Garth has an education topic, and he's really good at what he's doing. But at the same time, I've got a lady called Adele, and she is also in the education sector, but her last interaction or her last review was not that fantastic. So it's a bit negative. She probably could do with a little bit of coaching and training, but at the moment, she cannot be trusted to be taking the lead on education scenario. Cool. So let's see if this is going to work. I haven't tried that demo, so this is a little bit ad hoc. So let's say if I say using your knowledge, get me the best education expert. And then let's enable that and let's see if this is going to work. I do have another topic that I've created previously. Okay, so what it did right here is that it went to the MCP server, but then very quickly it went to the knowledge sources. It looked at the different sort of connectors, and it actually retrieved some information. Now, this is generic. This is generic. Do I have it enabled? No, I don't have it enabled. But yeah, this is a good example where I actually went and started hallucinating. It's actually trying to get some random information that is not available in my environment. So let's try again using the knowledge, or let's say maybe 0. Don't use the MCP connector. Using the knowledge in Dataverse. And let's try that again. All right. Based on in Dataverse. Now this is a bit prescriptive, but let's see if this is going to make a difference. Yeah, it still went to the MCP server. Search knowledge, sources, expertise, which is really good. This is what I wanted to do. And then hopefully, right. And that's the other interesting thing. It picked up Adele. However, there are concerns, but it didn't actually go beyond that and then try to give me Garth. So this is a good example where I'm like, can I trust it to actually make that decision for me? The information is there. It actually went and connected to Dataverse, but it picked the wrong record. Maybe it's because I didn't give it enough information and it didn't know how to acquire the right values. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it actually gave me the wrong information. So it's good to see how it works. But that's a good lesson learned. So let's try your request, Nathan. Again, we've got a little bit of time. Let's see. I'll do it in here. Sorry, I'm just setting up my environment. New. Those. All right. Here we go. So this is my agent. It's using Claude 4, and it's in agent mode. So what was your request? Optimize?
So yeah, so the 3 things I ask for is number 1, make sure that the instructions are clear. Number 2, add anything to the instructions that you think is missing so that you can do what you need to do. And then 3, ensure that tokens are being used optimally.
Okay, let's see if I've still got it in here. All right, let's have a look. I've never tried that, so you're
This is
getting me
my
to live on
favorite
the
agent
edge.
hack.
All right, okay.
Yeah. Why do the work when AI can do it for you?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the way we're thinking about it moving forward.
So I've been
Okay,
doing it with GPT-5, and I've found that that's pretty good.
okay. In the meantime, there's a question. If the steps are clearly defined, would it be more effective to use a deterministic flow rather than relying on the agents to flow instructions? Absolutely. Absolutely. What I would say, if you can put it in rules, then I would go with a deterministic flow, right? And the other reason is, and keep that in mind, a CPU cycle is cheaper than AI tokens. So if you can put it in a rule, and if you can execute it on the CPU, either as a plugin or a Power Automate or some deterministic progression, then you can use it as rather use that than AI. Use AI if it requires natural language understanding, if it requires something that cannot be done using your automation. So, for example, even like a lot of the stuff that we do today, you can do in multiple different ways, right? So, for example, extracting key information, as I showed you earlier, retrieving information from a text, and then bullet points what is the summary of that or the sentiment or things like that. You can still do that in prompt columns and then use that as deterministic steps. Yes, you can do that, but there's also like different ways of doing it. So unless you actually need AI, my recommendation is don't use AI. All right. Token optimization strategies. So is this the reasoning now? Yeah, here you go.
Yeah. Usually, the other thing I ask it to do is like just put it in copy paste. Sometimes it does it, sometimes it doesn't, but you can just
Yeah.
copy paste it in.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I like the fact that it gives you the reasoning, like in terms of
Yeah.
what needs to be done and so on.
Yeah.
All right, so this is basically the revised set of instructions, which looks a little bit better formatted and sort of easier to understand, especially as you're sort of putting them into your environment.
Yeah.
So that would make sense. I use it. I use actually prompts to improve my prompts in Copilot in GitHub Copilot. So, for example, I would write a prompt that would say, if I ever in the prompt tell you go in and create a table for me based on a CSV file that is available somewhere else.
Yeah.
I would write those prompts and I give it examples in terms of what needs to be done. But then most of the time I would go, actually, can you see if you can refine my prompt? And usually comes up with a better structure, examples, and things that would make a little bit more sense. So yeah, that's a good hack, Nathan. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no worries.
All right. So 5 minutes to go. Any final questions? Anything that people want to discuss? Hopefully, you guys learned a couple of things about using Copilot Studio, mainly around ensuring that you can call your agents as an agentic AI by using Power Automate, basically, to handle the triggering and then passing the relevant information. You can create an agent-to-agent communication as well by creating another agent, publishing it, making sure it's callable as an agent, and then adding it part of your parent agent. And then the other bit was around integrating with MCP server. And as you can see, I give it instructions on what to do without being deterministic, and it managed to actually give me something that is consistent. And then the third one is about pointing it to a knowledge environment, mainly Dataverse, and then retrieving the right information that is required in there. Right, so unless we have other questions, Nathan, anything you want to add? Jiva, if he's still on the
One
call?
thing I will add on knowledge with your agent, and I just learned this week, is when it indexes and you then go to move your agent between environments, it will index differently in different environments. Now I don't know if it does it for Dataverse, but it will do it with SharePoint and documents and other things. So the party trick to get around it is to use Azure AI search and index your data there and then just point your agent. So, ALM your agent from dev to UAT or whatnot, and then just point it at your Azure AI search where you've indexed it. So that's
right.
Yeah, something I didn't know.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is a known issue with Copilot Studio. So yeah.
And that's very useful to know. The reason why I wanted to show you guys how to do things like just from the sort of ground up is to understand what it's actually doing behind the scenes, how it's connecting, what service account is it using or service principal, and what's the logic behind it. The more you know about those things, the better your agents are going to be. And it's not about just relying on Copilot to generate the agent for you, but actually to tweak it to do exactly what you're after. Yep. Jiva, anything you want to add?
No, nothing from my side. I'm still learning on all these things. Like I'm too behind the race in terms of learning the AI and using them in the projects.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, JJ has his hand up.
Yeah, just one question regarding the testing. Earlier we had like deterministic flows we know, and whatever we tested, it's working 100% of the time. But now with this agentic or AI thing, we cannot say for sure like it is completely tested. So what are the best practices that we can follow to make sure like we cover most of the cases?
Yeah, that probably requires a session by itself. The thing is that the agents are undeterministic. So you cannot write a deterministic test to ensure that your undeterministic agent is behaving correctly. So what do? You create an undeterministic test to make sure that you can test your agent. So in other terms, you can create an agent that will test your agent, an agent that will call your agent. And there are tools available out there, Playwright being one of them, that Microsoft is investing heavily into it. And again, that might justify a session by itself. But basically what you're going to have is a set of instructions that would say, when I call that agent, this is what I'm expecting out of it. And then you would trigger your test. You would give it a collection of different inputs as you basically get to know what the potential inputs are. And then you go through this iteration of calling the agent multiple times, getting responses back. That response is then assessed by another agent to go, yes, this is in line with what I'm expecting, or no, this is actually not in line with what I'm expecting. And you would capture that telemetry, and that would feed back into enhancing your prompt. And you could use AI to actually enhance your prompts, where you would go, hey, based on those prompts, 50% of the time it's not getting the right answer. How do I refine my prompts to actually do the right thing? And then you feed it back into that loop to ensure it's the right thing. The other thing to do is natively, all the agents can integrate with Azure Telemetry. So you just have to put in your key, part of your settings, and then anything that is happening can be then pushed into your Azure Telemetry. You can go and monitor what's happening in there. What are the questions that are being asked? What's the output that the agent gave it? And then it detects, like, if people say, yes, that was helpful, or no, this was not helpful. And then you can go and go through those logs and check at what stages did it start hallucinating, or what did they ask that actually it did not understand? Go back to your prompts, update those, run your test to make sure everything is okay, and then get your responses back. Yeah. Prompts need version control. Yes, I agree with that. Prompts. I'm just trying to think. Given that the agents are solution ready, agents can be added into a solution. Once your agents are in your solution, then you can go and integrate your solution with GitHub or your Azure DevOps Git repository. And then you basically will have a text version of your agent, usually in YAML format, that is stored into your source control. This is one way of actually doing version control, where you can go and monitor that. We've done a session about that, I think, earlier this year or late last year, but it was around this integration between your unmanaged solution, so as you're doing it in the development, and your Git repository. And this is one way of doing versioning associated with that. Cool. It's 5 o'clock right now, so thank you very much for attending. Just a couple of things. We've got 2 more sessions until the end of the year. So October, we'll try to do one just in preparation for the Power Platform conference, or when we go back. I don't know if we have time. But the call for content for the November New Zealand Business Application Summit is open. So if anybody is interested in presenting, feel free to submit the topics. The topics will be open, or the call for content will be open until the end of October. And then after that, we'll finalize it. And then we'll have another session that will come in November, which is going to be the conferences that will happen in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, as well as some virtual tracks. So hopefully we'll see you guys there. With that, thank you very much for attending. That was a really cool session. Thanks for the support, Nathan and Jiva, and hopefully we'll see you next month.
Awesome session, Rami.
Thank you. Great session,
guys.